Hello, I have been requested to make an English version of the Vangasali information. So I'm going to try and do a duo for isiZulu and English. So I'll first start by explaining what Vangasali is. It is a national, back then, DSD campaign that was aiming at getting each and every center into the government system. By getting a center into a government system, we mean that we want to register that preschool and make sure that it's got partial care certificate as well as ECD program. So when you get into the Vangasali registration process, you will at the end get two certificates: your partial care, which looks at the facility and the safety of the facility, as well as your ECD program, which looks at the things that you are rendering to the children as they are in your care, making sure that you are capacitating them and you know what to do with them, you know how to discipline them. So that's what Vangasali is. It's a Tsonga word that directly translates to leave no child behind. So we are now at phase 2 of the Vangasali, and Vangasali is divided into 3 phases. The first phase was when we had the GovChat information line going out in centers. We are bringing in the information to say, I am here in this local municipality and this area, I've got so many number of children, I'm registered or I'm not registered. And by that, the centers will be committing to them coming forth to then get registered as partial care and ECD program. So what does registration mean? Registration means that your center has been assessed in terms of safety and health requirements, and that your center is suitable to keep the children, and that they will be safe until the end of the day when the parents come to fetch them. So we are governed by the Children's Act, and the Children's Act says that every place that keeps 6 or more children on behalf of parents at any given time of the day, that place needs to be registered as a partial care facility. So now we're looking at getting everybody registered and compliant. So registration is free. You don't have to pay anything. It's free of charge for everyone, and thanks to Nelson Mandela Foundation, who has sponsored a lot of the work that that enables the Vangasali processes to be fully implemented. That printed the application packs for you, and there have been over 24,000 of them have been widely distributed in the country, so that you don't have to stress about making copies. When this Vangasali was launched in 2020, it was launched when the ECD function was still under social development. So there might be some offices where you find that they can't locate the partial care files, because then there's been change of social service professionals responsible for ECD function. So now we are at DBE and we are continuing with registration. So now I'd like to take you through about the types of ECD services that we have. We have 2 types of ECD services. We are all looking at assisting 0 to 5-year-olds, and that's termed early childhood development. And then in our types of ECD services, you can either be center-based, which an example of course will be a preschool where children go in the morning, they spend over about 7-8 hours, and then their parents come and fetch them later in the afternoon. That would be a center-based ECD service. And then we have non-center-based ECD services, where we have preschools or services that are rendered to children maybe in groups. They don't necessarily operate from a fixed environment, and the likes of these will be your mobile ECDs, your toy libraries, and some other programs that come and teach children. It could be reading books. There's lots of them that are non-center based. So depending on the type of an ECD service that you are, you need to be registered for either partial care or program or both. So if you are center based, you need to be assessed in terms of the facility where the children are housed, and you also need to be assessed for a suitability of the program that you are rendering to children. A program doesn't necessarily have to be from a specific institution like your ECD service providers. A program is essentially just a plan to say that you need to provide us with an implementation plan, as well as the concepts and themes and concepts for us to see that you know exactly what to do. So you would have a yearly implementation plan, and then you'd break it down into weeks so that we know that you know that children need to grasp information in bits and pieces. So that's essentially what the program will be looking at. I'm mentioning this because there's been a lot of questions around, I'm rendering in Afrikaans program, but then nobody knows how to read it. There's nothing major about the type of the program you're rendering. We just want to know that you know that there should be an implementation plan and the program that you should be rendering, and you'll be judged against that. And the judgment of you in terms of you getting that program will depend on the actual site visits, because then we look at the toys, we look at the materials, is it age appropriate, etc., etc. But you don't have to worry about that now, because I'm going to take you through the phase where you're going to be assessed, and then I will tell you exactly what you need to prepare in your ECD service for you to just move swiftly with the registration process. So those are your types of your two ECD services that you have, your center-based and non-center-based. So if you're center-based, you need 2 certificates, partial care as well as programs. So worry not, because when you get taken through the Vangasali registration process, you will get both of the certificates, but then you will only have 1 file. But if you are a non-center-based ECD program, you will only have a program, and you will be assessed based on the program requirements, and you will receive a program certificate. I hope I had explained what Vangasali is and the types of ECD services that we have before I dive deep into the details of registration, which I'm going to be going through each and every form and explaining exactly why do we need that form and how do we fill each and every form. Before I close off this session for the introduction of ECD services, I would like to mention the 3 phases of Vangasali. I believe I had touched on it. The phase 1 was when we were collecting data, and we have over 52,000 ECD services that have been collected and are now on the online system. So they have been identified as existing, and they're now the only thing that the social service professionals in their respective offices need to just verify and update the information that was sent. And now we are on phase 2, which looks at capacitating our social service professionals so that we are able to implement the Vangasali processes. Then phase 3 will be when we are not at phase 3 yet, but that will be when we are looking at all the findings in terms of the assessments that were done, the reports that were issued, to determine the kind of level of assistance that can be given to the ECD services. So if a center was found, for example, to be having a toilet, but they need an additional toilet, so the types of the assistance that's going to be provided in phase 3 with the help of the collective of other sponsors outside of government, that is the hope and the plan for phase 3. What am I forgetting for Vangasali? I think that will be all for now. Thank you. Before we move on to the actual forms and everything else that we are going to be discussing about the registration and filling in the forms and why each form or attachment is needed, the whole Vangasali aim was to ensure that the way that registration is done throughout the country is standardized. So you'd find that when you go to KZN, for example, MC Ngai to Galeferi, where I'm from, you'd find that registration is done differently, and the social service professionals, they would require different things that are not the same as if I were in Joburg and I'm getting registered, and then they would ask me a different list. So what Vangasali did is to look at the Children's Act and the actual attachments that need to be asked from ECD services. So Vangasali aims to standardize the processes so that when you register, you do it the same way and you're asked the same documents. If you were in Joburg, or when you're in Tshwane, or if you're in Limpopo, or in everywhere else in the country. So we are all going to be using the same Vangasali application packs for us to be getting registered and filling in the forms for our applications to be registered. Another thing is that now we are no longer having just 2 types of registration, where in the past you would either be conditionally registered or fully registered. So depending on the type of registration status that you get, you would either be valid for 2, sometimes 3 years, sometimes 1 year in other areas. So here, and then for full registration, it would have been valid for 5 years, and then after 5 years you'd need to re-register again. So now there is 3 categories with the Vangasali, because one of the things that we're wanting to achieve is to ensuring that all the ECD services that were previously left outside of the government system and they were not counted and not registered because they simply do not meet our norms and standards as they are. We know that our policies will need to be reviewed, and then part of this exercise is to try and see if this was what's the word, if this was looked at in a different perspective, would it be fair for all context of the country? We know that we had been judging preschools based on the checklist, and you would say that you are registered subject to these conditions, and often these ECD services are already what I could term as middle class ECD services, where they have some of the resources and most of the resources, just that they're not perfect because there's no perfect ECD center. And our norms and standards for back then social development and now DBE, because function shift, we're judging centers harshly irrespective of the geographical area or where they are based. So a place in a township or in a rural area was judged in the same way as the center in an urban area, for example. And we all know that the majority of the ECD services that we have in the country do not have most of the things. Some of them don't even have enough toilets. You'd be likely to go into a rural area and you'll find a child-friendly toilet, even though they do make means for trying to make shift for certain things as required. You'd find that they wouldn't even have hand washing facilities. That's why they would have TP tabs instead, which at the end of the day, it served the same purpose of the hand washing facility, because we were only killing germs from the hands. So that is just what I wanted to highlight before we get or dig deep on the application documents and how we're filling in the forms. So now we've got bronze, silver, and gold. Your bronze and your silver, they are still like your conditional registration status, because you are not perfect, but then there are certain things that you still need to improve on. You are approved subject to the certain conditions. And when you have gold registration, it means that your center is almost perfect, so it will be the same as your old full registration. That will be valid for 5 years, and then after 5 years you'd need to renew because the conditions would have improved or deteriorated in your ECD service. So that's just one thing I wanted to help or to clarify before we get into the documents. So your bronze, silver, and gold is going to be determined by the ECD framework. So the ECD framework is just simply the norms and standards for DBE as they are, abstracted from the Children's Act, and the only difference is that they've been reworded to form a yes or no question. So for example, in a case of toilets, you would be asked, are there enough toilets? At least one toilet for every 20 children. That is our norm in respect of the toilet facilities. Then you'd either say yes or no. So in a case where you have got 30 children, the norm would also ask, is there enough toilets? At least one per 30 children. And then if that's the case, then you would say yes. In the past, if you had one toilet and 20 children, you would have been perfect, because then you would have been registered under a conditional registration. But if now, because we've got bronze, silver, and gold, we've made an allowance for 10 additional toilets so that at least we get them into the system, because then if we were judging them based on the old norms, then we would have said that they do not even meet conditional registration, because they've got more children than they should for one toilet. So that is the level of flexibility that has been applied in our norms and standards to allow the centers that do not have all the necessary requirements as per the norms. But we are not saying we are neglecting the safety of the children in that facility. It's just that we are being a bit lenient. So bronze would be like meeting the bare minimum norms and standards, but still safe for the children to be there. And then silver, you are in the middle, just in between. And gold, you are almost perfect. That's just what I wanted to highlight before I get into the actual forms. Thank you.